Okay, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be learning together again today as part of Drisha's Sefira Zman. Today's class is discussions on the Parashah, this week Behar with Rabbi Jon Kelsen, who is the Chief Education Officer here at Drisha. Just a reminder that if you're with us here on Zoom, I'll be sending an invitation to become a panelist. If you accept it, you'll be able to unmute and participate verbally in class, or turn on your video if you wish, so we can see your lovely face. You can also participate in writing in the chat if you're with us here on Zoom, or as a comment on Facebook. If you're watching us live, welcome to you as well. And just remember to keep yourself muted when you're not actively speaking. I'll also help mute as needed so we don't have background noise. And of course, just remember to unmute so we can hear your comments. And with that, I'll turn this to you, Rabbi Kelsen. Just unmute.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much, Evie. Thank you so much, Evie. Okay, welcome everybody. We are here in towards the end of Parashat of Sefira Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. This week is Parashat Behar, Leviticus 25. And Evie posted the source sheet, but I think I will screen share for a moment or for a few minutes. And just to note that it's hard for me to see. I mean, Evie will also help me with this, but it's hard for me to see hands or faces or such when I'm screen sharing. So feel free to unmute if I don't seem to see you. Okay, so with that, let me just speak out. Let me just share the source sheet over here. Okay, can everybody see that? Evie, is that the Drisha Parashah Behar there? Okay, great. Okay, so welcome everybody. Okay, so Leviticus 25. So we're towards the end here of Parashat Sefira Vayikra, Parashat Behar, and then Parashat Bechukotai really wraps it up. And Parashat Behar opens up. It's so called because by the Behar Hashem and Moshe Behar Sinai Lemor. God spoke to Moshe Behar Sinai Lemor. Behar Sinai. So you may be wondering, wait a minute, Behar Sinai. I thought we're in the book of Vayikra, not in the book of Exodus. Why we're talking about Har Sinai? And that's partly what's going to occupy us this evening, this afternoon, in our learning together of Parashat Behar. What's this? What do we make of this mentioning of Behar Sinai in this context? But by the Behar Hashem and Moshe Behar Sinai, we'll come back to that. And what follows is sort of a lengthy passage. It begins discussing the sabbatical year, the Shemitah. And I gave you here sort of an excised citation of chapter 25 and then into chapter 26. God speaks to Moshe Behar Sinai Lemor, Daber b'nei Yisrael Marta Alehem, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you enter the land, V'shavta haaretz Shabbat ladonai. The land shall Shabbat, a Shabbat to God. The land shall, how do they translate here? Shall rest, a Shabbat for God, shall observe a Sabbath. It's interesting that the institution which we call, Shvi'it or Shemitah, more commonly here is called a Sabbath of sorts, a Shabbat Lashem. Sheish Shanim Tizras Adecha, and this is specifically discussing at this point what we call in rabbinic terminology Shmitat Karkaot, the agricultural element of Shemitah. If you look in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 15 and Parashat Re'eh, so there the focus is Shemitah Ksafim, the sabbatical year vis-a-vis remission of debts. But here we're focusing at this point on Shemitah Karkaot, and for 6 years, this is I guess the Shabbat idea, 6 and 7, right? For 6 years you work your field, and then the 7th year it is a Sabbath of Sabbaths, Shabbat Shabbaton Yelar, Shabbat Lashem, during which you may not sow your field or prune your vineyard. This field must lay fallow and unworked, right? So there's kind of what we'd call by Shabbat language, we'd call an isor melacha, a prohibition of doing work, as it were here. That it's not a prohibition of doing work in general, and it's not called melacha, but it's a prohibition of working the land. Okay, and this passage, it goes on with other halachot. I just give you the excision here, but then in verse 55, Nun Hey, all the way, later in the chapter, if you have a Chumash or Tanakh in front of you, you can follow along with the whole passage. And it says there in verse 55, Kili b'nei Israel. Sorry. So this is where it's talking. I should just note that what I took out in part were some of the halachot about not only leaving the land fallow during Shemitah, but also the laws of the Eved Ivri, the laws of the Jewish servant or the Jewish slave, right, who is to be let free during the Jubilee year. Right, so to be let free during the Jubilee year. And as the Chumash there says, or God says, the reason for that, the reason that you ultimately have a mitigated or a circumscribed, a limited relationship to one's Eved Ivri, to one's Jewish Israelite servant or slave, is because Kili b'nei Israel avadim avadayim, because Israel are my avadim, says God. Avadayim asher hotzeti otam me'eretz Mitzrayim ani Hashem Elokechem. They're my avadim, who I hotzeti, who took them out literally, but also hotzeti might have a more technical meaning of who I sort of redeemed from slavery, from the Egyptian slavery, and therefore, if God redeemed them from the Egyptian slavery, then God sort of has rights to their status, as the Midrash has it, shtari kodem, any human master thereafter, the claim of that human master thereafter is secondary. It's been preempted and is therefore trumped by God's claim. Kishtari kodem, God already has a sort of and a master relationship to Bnei Israel. They are God's servants, and that has halachic ramifications, which is not for now. But asher hotzeti otam me'eretz Mitzrayim ani Hashem Elokechem. And the passage actually there, that's the end of chapter 25, the way we have the chapter, divisions here, which are not native to our tradition of the text, because it actually continues, right? And then it says in chapter 26, Lo ta'asu lachem elilim ufesel matzeva lo takimu lachem ve'even maskid lo titnu ba'artzechem lishtachavot aleh ki ani Hashem Elokechem et shabtotai tishmoru mikdashi tiro ani Hashem. Right? You shall not make for yourselves, idols of different sorts, carved images, pillars, etc., to worship on. I am Hashem your God, as opposed to others. Et shabtotai tishmoru mikdashi tiro. My Sabbath you shall keep. You shall keep my Shabbatot and revere or treat with reverence or fear my sacred, my mikdash. I am God. And then it leads into Parashah Bechukotai, which is often co-joined and read together with Behar, but not this year, which is a leap year. But this is in Parashah Bechukotai. You basically have the blessings and the curses, right? If you keep my commandments, says God, then your rain will come in time, etc., etc. And if not. Again, I took out a lot of verses here. But in verse 45 over here in chapter 20, in chapter 26, God says, Eileh, that sort of God says eventually, even if as a result of the Israel not keeping to the covenant, they'll be exiled, they'll eventually be returned. And I'll remember the first covenant, Brit Rishonim, when I took you out of Egypt, right? The relationship will remain intact ultimately. These are, and here's sort of has a summation here and a summative feel. These are the chukim shatim Torot. These are the various types of commandments which God gave between God's self, Beino Levein Israel, Behar Sinai, again, Behar Sinai, at Har Sinai, Biyad Moshe. Okay, and finally the book itself ends. Okay, so the main topic, well, we're going to address, during the course of our time here together, and it's a second sort of subtopic I'll mention at the end. But the main question that emerges, which has occupied the sages and the commentaries for a long time, is what do we make of Behar Sinai? The mentioning here, both in the beginning of our parsha, and then I tried to demonstrate here, right at the end of the parsha, and actually at the end of the whole section in Parashat Bechukotai, this idea, this notion of Har Sinai, Bahar Sinai. I thought we were in Parashat Vayikra, and we're told right in the beginning of Sefer Vayikra, I keep on calling it Parsha, but I mean Sefer, the beginning of Sefer Vayikra, that God speaks to Moshe from the Ohel Moed, from the tabernacle. Okay, so we would expect that mitzvot would be issued, and there's many mitzvot in the book before Parashat Behar, of course, right? That the mitzvot would be issued, from the tabernacle at this point. Now that we're in the narrative focusing on the tabernacle and not in the part of the narrative dealing with Sinai anymore. What would make of Sinai here? Okay, well, it goes back to a midrash of the rabbis from the Sefira, the rabbinic, actually Tannaitic midrash on Vayikra, and this actually has become sort of a colloquialism. Ma inyan, the rabbis say, "V'adaber Hashem Moshe b'Har Sinai lemor." Ma inyan shmita etzel Har Sinai. Ma inyan shmita etzel Har Sinai. What does shmita have to do with Har Sinai, or more technically, why is mentioning of the laws of Shemitah of the sabbatical year, and again, this has to do specifically with Shemitah Karkaot, with the resting and laying fallow of the land during the 7th year. Why is that juxtaposed with mentioning of Har Sinai, of Mount Sinai? Mahalo, and here the Sefira makes an assumption. Halo kol mitzvot nemru Sinai. We're not all the commandments issued at Sinai. Okay, so Midrash makes that assumption. Well, they're not all issued at Sinai, even those which are articulated later in the Chumash. So if so, why would the Chumash specifically talk about Har Sinai with regards to Shemitah and not, I don't know, let's say Parashat Kedoshim or Parashat Emor? Why is that not said there? Or why is not the book of Vayikra open up with the halachot that are mentioned by Har Sinai? What do we make of this? So the Midrash here says, Ella ma shmita ne'amru klaloteha v'diktukeha misinai. Well, here's the answer. Just like Shemitah, its general outlines and principles, the basics of Shemitah, as well as all of its details, were mentioned or articulated at Sinai. I shouldn't say mentioned, said, or articulated, given at Sinai. Af kulam ne'amru klaloteha v'diktukeha misinai. So to all of the other mitzvot, both their general rules and their specifics, the specific ordinances or details, were said at Sinai. It doesn't say written at Sinai, as it were, because they can be written later in the Chumash at different points in the course of the 5 books, but they were all said orally at Sinai. So Shemitah here becomes what we call a binyan av. It becomes the paradigm, or that which is learned from with regards to all other mitzvot. If Shemitah is everything, all of its details were articulated at Sinai, so too all other mitzvot as well. Now, where do we get the idea that Shemitah, all of its general principles, as well as specific ordinances, were set at Sinai? Like, where does that come from? So that we should learn from it that other things, all the other mitzvot, were set at Sinai. So to get into this, we're going to take a look at three primary commentaries: Rashi, Ibn Ezra, and Nachmanides, and the Ramban. And the Rashi offers a reading of this midrash, which I admit from the outset I find to be a bit puzzling, especially having read the Ramban and seen Nachmanides' reading, which seems to me to be, utilizing Occam's razor, a much simpler read. We'll have to struggle to understand what's really motivating Rashi in his read. Maybe someone here will enlighten me. Then Ibn Ezra will take a look. Ibn Ezra sort of takes a different read of the entire passage, and I think he, in a way, he could still accept this midrash, but he might read it very differently than Rashi, and then we'll see how Ramban has really a tour de force, which is worth spending time on. And that'll occupy for the first part of this of our time here. So Rashi says, Bahar Sinai, he first cites the midrash, and it's a slightly different version than I just read to you, but it's the same idea, right? Ma'in and Shemitah Har Sinai, right? So he says, "V'nira li shekach Parashah." Rashi says, he says, here's what I think this midrash means, this sifra. He says, can remember we asked, well, where do we get the idea that Shemitah, right, all of its general principle and its details were mentioned at Sinai, and that's where you learn from all the other mitzvah. Where do we get that idea to begin with? So he says, here's what I think it means. He says, what's really happening here is that the Midrash is noticing that Shmitat Karkaot, what we call it, right, the rules of Shemitah vis-a-vis the agricultural rules, right, the Shemitah of the land, that's not taught again, as it were. That's not taught in Arvot, Moab, Mishnah Torah. That's not taught in Deuteronomy. Because in Deuteronomy 15, it focuses on Shemitah Ksafim, right? The remission of debts and such. But the notion of not tilling the land during the seventh year, we don't find there. So he says, since that doesn't appear there in Deuteronomy, and B, he assumes, and it must come from somewhere. We know that those laws, exist, right? We know that those laws exist in their details. So it must be that they were issued at Sinai. Lamadnu sheklotel v'protel kulan nemar Sinai. It must be that they were issued and said at Sinai, right? Because they're not said, in Mishnah Torah. They're not said in Devarim. So now we know that all of it were offered at Sinai. And then uba katuv limeid kan akol dibor shediber Moshe shenidaber leMoshe, excuse me, shemesinai yechulam. And then the verse by juxtaposing the laws of Shemitah with the word Behar Sinai, with the phrase Behar Sinai, or introducing by saying this instead of Behar Sinai, means and everything, right? Everything, therefore, that was said at Sinai is just like Shemitah. Just like Shemitah, the details and the general principles and the details are offered there. So too, with regards to every other thing said at Sinai, Shemitah Chulam, Choloteim, V'diktoteim, all of their details and their principle and their alongside their general principles are offered at Sinai, and then they're repeated. Those which are repeated in Arvot Moab. Repeated in Mishnah Torah. Now, I have to admit that this Rashi, even as I'm explaining it now, is a bit confusing, right? Who mentioned anything about Mishnah Torah? Who mentioned anything here about Sefer Devarim? The Midrash doesn't talk about Devarim explicitly, and the argument is a bit confusing, right? The argument's a bit confusing that he's articulating here, but his general point does seem to be that he's noting, right, that some details are written in Mishnah Torah, some are not, and Shemitah becomes the paradigm for all of the mitzvot. If Shemitah Karkot specifically is articulated in all of its details alongside general principles at Sinai, so too all the other halachot. Okay, we're going to see in a few moments. I think the Ramban has a simpler read. Sorry, let me just stop screen share for 1 second again. Okay, any questions at this point or comments? Okay, let me try this again. Okay, so sorry, I'm actually have to stop. Does everyone has the I have to stop the screen share. There's a technical issue here, but I'm just going to have to read it to you. But you do have the text. You can do the link in the chat, and that will allow you to access it without my screen sharing, because it seems to be some technical issue here. Okay, so this has been Rashi so far. Now Ibn Ezra takes an entirely different approach here. Ibn Ezra, which is source number 5, says as follows. Here's his comment that we'll try to understand it, and the Ramban deals with that as well. Ibn Ezra says on this verse, Behar Sinai, he says, first of all, Ein mukdam u'mu'achar b'Torah. The Torah is not written in chronological order, and this is, as you may know, right. This is a sort of a principle or an interpretive assumption that some interpreters hold. Ramban rejects it, but but it is adopted by Rashi and others, including Ibn Ezra. The Ein Mukdam Muchaber Torah, that the Torah is written in not specifically chronological order, but rather, right, some thematic order. That something about the theme, or maybe you want to say literary considerations, are what determine the order of passages in the Torah, as opposed to what happened when, as opposed to strict chronology. And therefore, he says, Ein Mukdam Muchaber Torah, v'zo Parashah kodem vayikra v'chol parashot shehem acharav. And this Parashah, therefore, he can claim, this Parashah, what Parashah does he mean? He seems to mean not just the opening, section regarding Shemitah, but actually everything that happens in between, everything in Parashat Behar, basically, right? Maybe even, as I think he believes it, even Bechukotai, right? Even this what we call the next Parashah, right? Even the passage about the blessings and curses, all of these things happened happened at Sinai before what we've read from chapters 1 through 20, the end of 24 in the book of Leviticus. All of the pieces from 1 through 24 in the book of Leviticus, that happens after what's brought here in chapters 25 and 26. Right? This little unit actually was offered at Sinai, and then everything after at the Olam Moed, assumedly, right? When did this happen? It says, Ki hadibor b'Har Sinai. This was at Har Sinai. Ata karat habrit haktuva b'Parshat ve'elim mishpatim. And here's a chidush of his. He says, basically, that already in Parshat Mishpatim, already in the book of Exodus, in chapter 24, it says that this is in Mishpatim, this is before Kitisa, etc., right, and well before the book of Vayikra, of course, that, so opening up the verse, that Moshe, they establish Moshe comes down the mountain, right, and he brings down, the word of God, right? He tells them by Saper Laham et Kol Divrei Hashem in chapter 24. And it says in chapter 24, verse 7 of Exodus, that Moshe takes this book of the covenant, Sefer HaBrit, whatever that's referring to, and he reads it to the people, and that they say about that, Na'aseh v'nishma. And the people say, we shall do, and then we'll hear, right? The famous Na'aseh v'nishma. So Ibn Ezra claims that the content of that Sefer HaBrit, apparently, is none other than this week's Parsha, and assumedly and the next week's Parsha as well, Behar Bechukotai. That what we're reading here now, Behar Sinai, this is the covenant, right? The Sefer HaBrit. What we're reading now about Shemitah and about the Avadim, etc. This is the covenant. Why then would it be? And maybe I should actually mention now that this is the covenant. That this parsha seems to refer back to not only Parshat Mishpatim, but also the Parshat Yitro. What I mean by that is, and I didn't include it here. On the source sheet. But as you read Parshat Behar, I did include it actually. I'm sorry. That when you go back to the end of chapter 25 above, and then go into 26, right? Source 1 and then into source 2. So what did we have? Kili, the verse 55 of 25, right? Israel is Armaya Vadim, Asher Hotzeti Otam Eretz Mitzrayim, Ani Hashem Lokechem. Mine, because God, they are my servants, and I am the one who freed them from the land of Egypt. I am Hashem, your God. I am Ani Adonai Elohechem. And then it says again, verse 26. I'm in source 2 above. Don't make any idols. Keep my Shabbat, that Shabbatai Tishmaru, Mikdashi Tiro, and to fear my sanctuary. So it does sound, kind of evocative or reminiscent of nothing else than the Aseret HaDibrot, right? It reminds us of at least parts of, or the beginnings of, the Ten Commandments. Ani Hashem Lokechem Asher Hotzeitichem Me'eretz Mitzrayim Mibeit Avadim. I am Hashem, took you out of Egypt. Right? Don't have other gods. Keep Shabbat. And you could claim, as some have, that mikdashi tera'u, fearing the sanctuary, revering the sanctuary, is in some ways parallel to not taking God's name in vain. I won't get into that right now, but the point, I'm just making the point that the way Ibn Ezra reads this, the whole section here, right, refers back to Sinai. It actually, more than that, occurred, or was like said, was offered at Sinai. It in fact is the content of the Sefer HaBrit, quote unquote, the book of the covenant mentioned in chapter 24 of Exodus. Here it is. This is, right, the book of the covenant, and the blessings and curses, etc. And this is we've been waiting with bated breath basically until we get to the end of Sefer Vayikra to learn of the content of the book of covenant. Now, why would that be? Why would it get deferred till now? So he offers, I'm back in Ibn Ezra in verse 5, in source 5, excuse me. He says, "V'hiskira b'makom hazeh," it's mentioned, it's kind of, placed here, it's redacted here, in this part of the Chumash, the end of Vayikra. L'chaber tana'ei haaretz, in order to connect it with the conditions of dwelling or remaining in the land, right? Because in Sefer Vayikra we've learned that the ability for Israel to stay in the land and for the land not to, vomit them up is the language, is dependent, is contingent upon their basically fulfilling their side of the covenant. If they do that they're a holy people and a pure people, and they abide by God's command, so then they stay in the land. But if not, then it is indeed Tana'ei Haaretz. It's indeed a contingent arrangement, and they can be exiled from the land. The land will actually not tolerate their presence, right? They're spit out of the land. And indeed, right? And as it says in the book of Vayikra, right, earlier in the book, that specifically a violation of the laws, governing, sexual or illicit, sexual relationships, violations of those will result in being sent out of the land. And also in this parsha, it focuses on Kenema Parshat in Mechukotai al Shabtot Haaretz. Then Mechukotai, in the blessings and the curses, the Torah focuses on, sounds like it's focusing specifically or stressing specifically the law of the Sabbath of the land. That is to say, Shemitah Karkaot, as a law which is necessary to be kept in order to be kept in turn in the land, and that if one will not keep it, then the land, and people get sent out of the land, and the land will have its rest, rest of the people, right, who do not give it its own Shabbat, its own rest. Okay, and therefore our section Parashah Behar starts by his Parashah starts by saying, here's the book of the covenant. Right here is what the laws of the Sabbath of the land, Shemitah Karkaot, among other things, and it's placed here because we're at the part of the book of Vayikra which says this whole thing is contingent, right? This whole being in the land or remaining in the land, it is not an absolute, condition of the people. It is rather people Israel. It is rather contingent. It can change. Okay, this is Ibn Ezra's reading. So I want to just make 2 points. One, to clarify and then pause for questions or comments or thoughts. One is to articulate or reiterate that for Ibn Ezra, unlike what seems to be emerging from Rashi, for Ibn Ezra, we had the question, why specifically Shemitah, is said, Bahar Sinai. And he says, it sounds like for Ibn Ezra, it's not specifically Shemitah. It's the whole section. This whole thing is Bahar Sinai. So Bahar Sinai refers to the whole section. Here, indeed, there's an envelope structure. It opens with mentioning Har Sinai and closes with mentioning Har Sinai. So there's an envelope structure here. And this whole parsha, including the blessings and the curses, are the content of their constitutive, right? Of the covenant at Sinai, to which the people said, Na'aseh v'nishma. Why then is it placed here? Because the book is interested, Sefira is interested in making the point that the people's residing in the land is contingent, right? Is not absolute, right? It can be taken away, and therefore, even though this passage you might have thought would have been placed, excuse me, in Parashat Mishpatim, it was delayed, as it were, until here. I just want to make a side comment, and then pause. That this year especially, I have to say that the notion of the contingency of being in the land, is haunting and striking. And this is not a particular political statement at all, but just, I think, a statement of my take on the realities that we're living in very scary times, and the notion the idea that the Jewish people can be in the land, right, and that is, the land in an absolute sense, is really being non-contingent sense, in an inevitable permanent sense, is it's seeming very shaky. It's not to say that I think one thing or another about what will happen. We all have our prayers, but I have to say, right, that it's hitting me that way this year. This notion that being in the land is ultimately, it's a gift, and it's part of the dream here, but it is contingent. It's interesting that the Haftorah is taken from the book of Jeremiah, and in the book of Jeremiah, you see that the people are at a time of near exile, and he's told to nonetheless purchase a field, right, with full all the legal trappings, with witnesses and sign a deed and etc. Purchase a field, and he does so, and he does so, they're about to go into an exile, because they will return and occupy the land, return to the land, and occupy the land again. And this act, demonstrates, or maybe shorts up the confidence of the people that even at this moment that they will return. You have this fascinating moment in the Haftorah, again from the book of Jeremiah, where I think it's actually a very rare moment, where we're given like a window into the psyche, to the mind of the prophet, because in the Haftorah, Yirmiyahu is told to do this, right, to buy the field in Anatot, and he does that. So he buys the field in Anatot, okay, from his cousin, and he does it in front of the people, and God says, houses and fields and vineyards will yet be bought in this land. So he does this whole thing, and then you have this interesting moment where, after making this proclamation, after doing the deed, right, after issuing the deed, he prays to God. It's almost like now he does the public thing, and then you have a window into the private soul of the prophet. And he prays to God after he's given the bill of sale, and he says, God, what he basically says is, God, you've taken care of us till now. You've redeemed us. You made heaven and earth. You took us out of Egypt. You gave them this land. The people did not hearken to your voice, and therefore, behold, we're being attacked, and it's being handed over to the Kasdim, to the Chaldeans, right? What you declared has happened, and you see it, right? Ata amarta, Vasher dibarta haya v'hincha ro'eh. And now what you said would happen is happening, God. Look out the window, God. We're about to be conquered. We're being besieged. We're about to be exiled. And yet you tell me purchase this field, purchase real estate when we're about to be exiled. What I find so kind of moving about this moment is that how often do we see into, like as I say, the soul of the prophet and the distinction between the public role of the prophet and his or her private identity. Publicly, there are Jeremiah is issuing the parties on the party line, right? He does what God says, but we realize that privately he actually does so with grave doubts and great not hesitation, but it's not clear that he fully believes what he's doing, believes what he's told to do, even the prophet. So the sense of the contingency of being on the land, even Jeremiah in that moment still senses that he's there contingently. And that, of course, the Haftarah would end on a good note and a note of hope. And God says to Jeremiah, "Do you really not believe me?" He says, "I am God, Elohei kol basar. Is anything too wondrous from me? Hamimeni yipalei kol davar." And that's how the Haftarah ends in this tradition. So indeed, we are left with a question, right? Rhetorical question. No, it's not impossible for God to do so, and God does see, and God will return. But this is in any event, the message of, or a message of Behar B'chukotai, and the Haftarah as well. And this is Ibn Ezra. Now I want to turn to Ramban in just a moment, but let me just pause. Any thoughts, comments, questions? Okay. So let me share with you the Ramban. This is a great Ramban. The Ramban says he deals with Rashi and Ibn Ezra and offers his own reading, because this is number 6. And I didn't have a translation handy, but I'll translate that which is relevant. So in the beginning, he says, "Vaydaber Hashem Moshe B'Har Sinai," and he cites the whole first paragraph as him citing, the midrash from above, and then Rashi's reading of it. So he says in the second paragraph, "Ve'eino nachon be'enai klal." He says, I don't read that midrash the way Rashi does at all. Okay, because he says, after all, first of all, harbe mitzvot k'shmita shelo nishnu b'arvot Moab. There's many mitzvot like Shemitah Karko, which are not taught or reiterated in Devarim. V'neda bahen shenemru klotem rotem misinai obal moed. So why choose Shemitah as the one to teach that everything was said at Sinai? Why not choose one of the other ones, right, who are not mentioned in Devarim? And furthermore, he says, "Ba'od minayin shehukshu shar hadibrot shenishnu b'arvot Moab l'Shemitah v'lo hayu kloteim misinai rotem b'arvot Moab." And he says, and second of all, even if you say, okay, so Shemitah, is a mitzvah whose principles and details were articulated at Sinai. Now, how do you know that's true of everything else? Maybe the other ones, were different. That their principles were at Sinai, but the details were in Devarim. Where do you get this from, right? And so he says, I'm going to skip to the next paragraph. He says, here's what I really think this midrash means. And I have to say to you all that this Ramban's reading to me, as I said earlier, seems so much simpler to me than Rashi's. It makes me wonder what's actually motivating Rashi in his read. And some of the super commentaries in Rashi try to explain him what he means, but it seems they seem sort of like attenuated interpretations. It seems difficult. Here's how Ramban reads it. Simple. He says, "Habraita hashnuya perusha barur." Here's the clear meaning of this text, of this braita, of this midrash. Shahashmita ne'emru klatem misinai. He says, Shemitah, we know already that its general principles were said at Sinai. How do we know that? Because in Parshat Mishpatim, Shemitah is mentioned. It's mentioned briefly, but it's mentioned right in amongst the other laws of chapter 23. Mentioned Vashviyi Tishmatena, right? You should sort of pull back your hand, or leave the field fallow in the 7th year, and everyone else, all the poor get to eat from the field. That's all it says. And that's the klalot, right? The chalim, excuse me, right? Those are the general rules. Ubekan chazar, and then in our parsha, forget Sefer Devarim, right here in Parsha Behar, you have all the details. Ubekan chazar va'amar ki Behar Sinai od ne'emaru kol prateha shari kulam nizkaru parsha azot, and then all the details here in this week's parsha, Parsha Behar, those are the details that Midrash is referring to, and it says, right, that God said Behar Sinai these things. And it says at the end as well, right? It's these things, right? So we see that Shemitah is mentioned in general, right? The klal is mentioned by Sinai, meaning, in Parshat Mishpatim in Exodus. And then here the Torah makes a point of saying that all the details we're reading in this Parsha were said by Har Sinai. So that's how you know Shemitah, or Shemitah Karkaot, all of its details alongside its principles were said at Sinai. B'sof Hanyan, and then as we read above, at the end of this whole thing, it says, Elu ha-mitzvot asher tziva, in Vayikra, Elu ha-mitzvot asher tziva Hashem Moshe b'nei Yisrael b'Har Sinai. These are the mitzvot which God's, commanded to Moshe at Sinai. That's the one, that closing, coda, that's the Hakish kol ha-mitzvot al ha-Shemitah in this carrot. That's what connects all of the mitzvot to Shemitah. That's to say that all of them were taught at Sinai. And that's how he reads, this midrash. Unlike Rashi. Okay, so if someone has an idea what's motivating Rashi, please just unmute, jump in, or write it in later, or let me know. I put my email on the top of the page. But and again, if you look at Chizkuni or some of the others of super commentaries, you'll see they try to deal with Rashi, but it seems complicated to me. Ramban seems much simpler, especially since who mentioned Arvot Moab in this midrash? No one mentioned explicitly Devarim, so something's pushing Rashi, but Ramban seems much simpler. Okay, and then Ramban gets into this.
Excuse me, maybe Rashi's having
yes.
the difficulty because there are more details of Shemitah that aren't mentioned here that are mentioned in Devarim. So he is to miyashev how that is.
Yeah, it could be, although he does seem to stress Shemitah Karkaot, right? The details in
right,
Devarim
which is here.
Right. So, but I think that he, right, let me look at the Rashi again as I have it in my hard copy. Yeah, Lefisha Lo Masinu Shemitah Karkaot. So, but maybe, maybe he's using this as an opportunity anyway, right, to deal with the how to account for like that which is, that which isn't.
It's repeated, right? Because if he says that they're all said there, then how do you account for that there's some new pop-ups there? Exactly.
Why are some things not there, and why are some new things there, and what do you do with that? So maybe that's partly what's bothering him, and this is an opportunity, right, to
address that,
link them all to Sinai and to address that. It could be. So the Ramban here says as follows. I'm going to continue with the Ramban. The Ramban says, and now I'm on page 4. I'm going to skip where he cites. I'm going to skip where he cites Ibn Ezra, but could we kind of explain Ibn Ezra with him in mind? But you see where it says on page 4, Ulefi da'ati, the last paragraph on page 4. He said, I underlined it. He says, Lefi da'ati, he says, Ibn Ezra makes his claim, right, that it's written out of chronological order, and that our parsha actually was said in belongs really chronologically in chapter 24 of Exodus, etc. He says, I don't go with that. I think yesh mukdam uchabar Torah, that it's written in this order for a reason. And here's what he offers. It's kind of like a tour de force mini essay of his. He says ki perush Behar Sinai. He says in a very order, and he says, because I understand when it says Behar Sinai, and this is really the critical point, when it says that these mitzvot were said Behar Sinai in our parsha, it doesn't mean in Parshat Mishpatim. It means Ba'aloto Sham, and Moshe went up lekabel haluchot hashniyot. It means, refers to when Moshe goes up the second time, right after the golden calf incident. When Moshe goes up the second time to receive the second set of luchot, not the first set of luchot, that's when all of this stuff was taught, right? Was given over. How so? So let's sort of follow him along here. Ubiyor hanyan. Ki betchilat 40 yom harishonim sheluchot harishonot katav Moshe zera brit et kol devrei Hashem. Because the first 40 days, right? Moshe receives the first luchot, and God, all of the mishpatim and all of those things, right up until that point. Hanem rimsham, everything that's written then in the Torah until that point, right, including all of Parashat Mishpatim, and that's where we have. That's where you have the covenantal, ceremony by Zerodam, Brit Ala'am, right? They have the blood spilled on them, the covenantal blood. There's a whole ritual. That's part, kind of scene one. And then you have, as we know, the golden calf, Ushatuba Egel, and we break the luchot. We have the golden calf, the golden calf, the breaking of the first luchot. So what happens in there is at that point, what happens is the covenant, which had just been made and cut, between God and Israel, is broken, or it's ki'ilu, it's broken. And if it's broken, what that means is you have the need to reinstate it when there's a repair and the offering of the second luchot. Okay, so it's broken, and when God wants to and therefore when God, forgives, right, and offers a second luchot. So God says to Moshe, God says in chapter 34, right, okay, I'm making a new covenant with you, right? And rearticulates, right, some of the more severe mitzvot that had been said in the first one, right, in the first covenant. Here I'm underlining again. And God wanted to really underscore, right, to make severe, right, to underscore the severity, or to enhance the severity of this covenant. Remember, the first one was broken after all, and added to it, blessings and curses, which were designed to shore up this covenant. And that it should include everything from before. And therefore, this new covenant, this new covenant, which includes within it these words of rebuke, make sure to keep it, has the coda of these are, and it's this, this catch-all, Kim, Mishpatim, Torot, all of these types of, laws. This is everything which God gave between God's self and the people at Sinai. Romei Zakola Mitzvot, Mishpatim, Hashanim Rubavit Rishonah, in Elam Mishpatim, etc. Everything is included. All of the terms of the first covenant are included in the second covenant. So let me just make sure you're following here. What's happening here is that Ramban is saying that in the when God offers a second luchot, God has to reinstate the covenant basically, right, and make a new covenant. And has to make sure the first this new covenant is a stronger covenant in a sense, including with blessings and curses, right, and it's inclusive though of everything that was offered, in the first covenant, all the terms of the first covenant. But it has to be redone because we've had a rupture by the Chet Egel, and now we're coming back together. We have to sort of renew the vows. And V'hinei, the second to last line of page 4. V'hinei b'sefer habrit harishon ne'amra hashrit bechlal. Now, in the first covenant, Shemitah is mentioned, as we said, in Parashat Mishpatim, chapter 23 of Exodus, in the most general terms. V'ata b'vrit hazot hasheniya ne'amra b'fartev v'tkeved onshal. But here it's mentioned full blown, general principle, all the details, even the onesh. Remember that in the rebuke, or in the tochacha, in Bechukotai, it keeps referencing, right, that if you don't keep the Sabbath of the land, the Shabbat Haaretz, that seems to be like, the straw that breaks the covenantal back, right? That seems to be the focus there. Right? So it's mentioned, then there'll be punishment. So Shemitah is really, the Shabbat Haaretz is really, really focused upon. and really stressed and strengthened in his presentation here. And in this brit, right? It said with all of its details and its punishment. And I'm on page 5. Let me see if I can just skip because of time's sake. Yeah, I'm going to skip this on page 5 to where I underlined again. He says, so this is all offered, right? And taught, right? This is all part of the second covenant. But he says what happens is that when God makes a second covenant, right? So God, part of the second covenant is, you're still going to build me a Mishkan. I'm still going to dwell with you. Okay? I'm still going to remain with you. And therefore the Torah spends a lot of time talking about, at that moment, how they build the Mishkan and how God's Shekhinah dwells there. Because even though there's been a rupture, that rupture has been repaired. There's been forgiveness. There's been a new covenant or a renewed covenant. There's the second Luchot. There's the all of the mitzvot. But the Chumash, focus on building the Mishkan, and then on not only building the Mishkan, but also how to, the functions of the Mishkan, right? How to, what to do in the Mishkan, right? The Karbanot and all the Kohanim and all the rules. And that's basically what occupies us throughout so much of Sefira Yikra. It's a continuation of the story, right? Sefira Yikra is a continuation of, and now that we have this Mishkan, I'm going to dwell with you. Here's how it all works. And we're in a sense, still at that moment of Sinai. We're still standing at Behar at Sinai in a sense, but the Torah is saying that now that we've prepared the relationship, we're going to focus on the Olam Moed and on the building of the Olam Moed. So I see I underline on page 5, B'chol Yemei Hayasot HaMishkan Lo Diber Lahem Moshe Davar Acher B'kol Asher Nitzava. So Moshe had been commanded all of this other stuff, but Moshe held it to himself because they're building the Mishkan and they're focused on the Mishkan, and the Mishkan is where the Shekhinah is what's going to allow God's presence to dwell amongst them, which is this major focus of the covenant, which is a major representation and proof of the covenant's working. So finally, when they finish building the Mishkan, and then when they are taught all of the commandments about the Karbanot, etc. B'kasher hishlim amar lahem, he says to them, okay, there also was one other piece which God offered me at Sinai. Od siva oti Hashem bahar Sinai lefarish lechem hashmita v'hayovel. God also told me something else I need to tell you about, and that is this whole thing about the sabbatical year and the Jubilee year. Ulechrot lachem al hamitzvot v'shotim brit chadasha v'alav ushua. And God told me, I want you to cut for them a new covenant, right? Renew the vows on all of these mitzvot, and all these ones, and we learn about them here, okay? And we learn about them here, and they're offered here at the end of Sefira Yikra after we've basically finished understanding the Mishkan, the building of the Mishkan, the functioning of the Mishkan, how we need to act in order to keep the Mishkan and God's presence amongst us, in terms of the covenant, right, etc. And then we get until the final piece here about the Shemitah. So what he's saying here, I believe, is that instead of understanding, like, you have Sefer Shemot and you have the story of Sinai, the first Luchot, the sin of the golden calf, second Luchot, and then like you're done with Sinai, and then you move on to the Olam Moed, the tabernacle, and all of its functionings, which leads to the question of why in the heck would you end that book with Har Sinai? He says, we never really left Sinai in a sense, right? I mean, we did, but we never really left Sinai, because everything from the second Luchot until Parashah Behar is basically the story of the renewing of the terms. Right, it's the renewing of the relationship. It's the second Luchot, the second covenant, or the renewed covenant, and all the terms thereof, everything about it. And then you get to Parashah Behar, and you say, okay, and now that we're here, I have to tell you one more thing. And that one more thing is Parsha Behar and Parsha Bechukotai. Right? That there
Rabbi
are
Kelsen, I just want to make sure, did Javier, did you notice that he has his hand up? I just want to make sure.
yes.
Javier, would you like to speak?
No, you can finish your thought and
Oh,
then.
okay, sorry about that.
Thank
Okay.
you, thank you. So yeah, but we're almost wrapping up anyway, and then we'll have time to talk. So we get to the final piece here, Parsha Behar, and then there's one more piece here in Parsha Behar, as and Mechukotai, and that is a piece of you know, of the Shemitah and the Yovel, etc. So I want to close by saying that it raises the question of, okay, so nonetheless, why is the Torah focused on Shemitah and Yovel here at the end, when, you know, why is that saved as a piece of the covenant, right? That gets, you know, articulated and gets sort of the final word stressed in Behar and then in Mechukotai as well. Why is that the focus? So what Rabbi Silver suggested is, which I think is very powerful, is that if you look in the book of Exodus, right? I just said that book of Vayikra is really, right, a continuation of the book of Exodus. We said this in previous, you know, Parashah Shirim over this year. If you look in the book of Exodus, perhaps the main mitzvah of the book of Exodus, you could argue, is the mitzvah of Shabbat, which is not surprising really when you realize that they're coming out of slavery, and Shabbat is, you know, among other things, the thing which slaves do not have, right? The quintessential mitzvah of the book of Exodus, in a sense, is a Shabbat. It comes up multiple times in various parts of the book. And Shemitah, or you know, Shabbat Haaretz, is just that. It is basically a Shabbat in a different sense. If you want to say the Shabbat of the seventh day of the week is Shabbat of time, and Shemitah is Shabbat of time, but as it relates to space, however you will, it partakes of, it's called Shabbat, right? Shabbat Haaretz, it is another angle on the Sabbath, right? Because both Shabbos and Shemitah, if you will, right, both the seventh day and the seventh year, at some level, or part of them, teach you that that this world is not our own. It actually belongs to God. Shabbat is the sacred time which you can't use for your own means. Malacha is forbidden, and Shvi'it means that your very existence in the land, right, itself is not, you're not really your land, right? The land is actually God's, and is not just there for your own utility. And that's a basic point of the covenant. So Shemitah, meaning Shabbat, meaning Shabbos, right, is in a sense, the quintessential representative mitzvah of the entire covenant, and upon it rests, right? Upon it rests the covenant and the remaining in the land, etc. Fulfillment of it actually, is necessary in order to live in the land properly, and for the story to complete properly. So this is Ramban in short order. I encourage you to, and we will come to your question in just a moment. I encourage you to look at the Ramban in greater depth, to consider what was driving Rashi then, who had a different read of this midrash, but to appreciate the contribution of the Ramban in connecting Parshat Behar not merely as sort of a piece from the end of Exodus, which got, pasted here, but rather it allows us to reread the entire scope, the entire narrative arc, from Luchot and the second Luchot, the first and second tablets, all the way till here, are part of a grand story of renewing the terms of the covenant. Okay, let's pause. I had a whole other piece here which we didn't get to. It was also in your source sheet, some beautiful piece, Hasidic reading by the Degel Machaneh Ephraim, but again, that'll have to be for another time. Okay, thank you very much. Whoever needs to go, I don't want to keep you late. Whoever needs to go, thank you for being with us, and Shabbat Shalom. Whoever has questions, and I don't know if it's Xavier or how to pronounce your name exactly, but please. Javier, I'm not sure exactly, but go ahead.
Sure, yeah. I mean, my question aside, I mean, if maybe with the time, would you want to jump into the Degel Machaneh Ephraim quote?
I think we're actually we're actually at 8:30. We're at 8:30 my time. We're at 1:30 your time. So I think I won't get to that right now. So go ahead.
No, it's okay. I don't really know how to ask the question yet, but maybe next time.
Okay. Listen, I have my email on the source sheet so that you can reach out.
Well, I guess a quick well, if there's a way, I mean, like, it's basically Ramban. I mean, it's a big section you went over, but like, the details on the terms that are sort of elucidated in that renewing of the terms or in that second breach, all these details. I mean, is the read on that like these details would not be elucidated without that initial break in the covenant? Is that
Well, certainly the details were not. It's a good question. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but I will say that it's clear that the details were not written, right? In the first recension, the first iteration. Right?
or
They would,
even maybe in more just like the shot level, like Ramban isn't saying this isn't a chronological flashback, right? Like the way Ibn Ezra is saying, right?
correct. It's that it's
So
in his.
what's that?
It's that Moshe only told them these laws at this point.
Got it.
Right, that's the basic point.
At
Right?
what point?
That he may have received them earlier, but he held on to them until they finished the whole process of building the tabernacle and sort of getting the tabernacle going, or at least telling them how to get the tabernacle going. He held on to that because, I mean, the Ramban says actually because they were busy with that, and that's important. But I would add that it's not just that they were busy with that; it's that is key, right? That's a key expression. The building the tabernacle and having God reside in it is a key expression of
Which is interesting because it mentions the
fact that the
tabernacle
covenant has been
within,
renewed. Yeah.
within the text itself. There's an allusion to that about fearing the Mikdash.
Oh, that's a good point. Also, yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point as well. I mean, I would expand on that actually, right? And maybe this is what he means is that you see that it's not only the Mikdash feeling the Mikdash. That's a very good point you're making, right? But also that the Ten Commandments are kind of referenced, right, as if to say like they're rearticulated, right? They're rearticulated in short. I'm God took you out of Egypt. Don't have other gods. Shabbat. It's like remember that from the first covenant, from the first Luchot. Here it is again. Okay, it still holds. I'm referencing back to that and I'm reinstating it.
But so in terms of like this sort of chronology of the narrative itself, like in like the literal flow of text, and we get to this section within this like linear reading of things, is like in a literal sense, is this like now like way after the standing at Sinai, and it's like being told, I guess, like in the camp? Is that like, or like I guess
It sounds like that, right? It sounds like it's yeah. I mean, they're still in that area.
Well, because I'm trying to find the distinction between Ibn Ezra's read and Ramban's read, where Ibn Ezra is saying like this is literally from that episode at Mount Sinai. It's just
here's what I'd say, and then I think we do have to stop. And you have my email. I'm happy to continue. We can even have a phone call if you want. But that for Ibn Ezra, our Parashah Behar, right, was was articulated, right, actually much earlier, right? I think articulated to the people, right? Way earlier in the book of Exodus. I mean, right? Actually, right? It was because he took the Sefer HaBrit. It says, right, the book of the covenant, and he gave it to them, right? So that's what's made on. So articulated much earlier, but it's only written here for other reasons. According to Ramban, as I understand it, according to the Ramban, according to Nachmanides, Moshe never told the people this stuff until now.
Now
so not just now meaning after everything else we read in Vayikra, after they built the Mishkan, after they were told all the halachot about everything until this point. Then he says, and I have another thing to tell you I never told you.
Got it. Yeah, no, I get it. I get the distinction.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you, Rabbi Kelsen. And just a reminder that next week we'll have Rabbanit Leah Sarna, who will teach about the Chukotai. Lehitraot, everyone.
Bye-bye.